The classified ad was sandwiched between a rusted riding lawnmower and someone selling a collection of National Geographic magazines from the 1970s. Elena Martinez almost scrolled past it entirely, her thumb hovering over her cracked phone screen as she sat in the McDonald's parking lot during her lunch break. She had exactly 18 minutes left before she needed to clock back in at the nursing home, and she was spending those precious minutes doing what she did every Wednesday, scanning auction listings for anything at all that might change her life. Most weeks it was hopeless. Farm equipment she couldn't afford. Houses with foundation problems she definitely couldn't afford. Commercial properties requiring cash she'd never see in her lifetime. But this Wednesday, something caught her eye. A listing so strange, so seemingly worthless, that she read it 3 times to make sure she wasn't misunderstanding. Municipal water tower. Condemned. Structural damage from lightning strike. Property includes 8 acres. Located Highway Mining Access Road, Copper Falls, Montana. Minimum bid $500. Sold as is. No inspection available. Demolition buyer's responsibility. $500 for a destroyed water tower. Elena stared at the words, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. She had exactly $723 in her savings account. Money she'd scraped together over 8 months by skipping meals, picking up double shifts, selling plasma twice a week until the clinic told her she needed to take a break or risk her health. That money was supposed to be for emergencies, for when Mateo's asthma flared up and they needed the ER, for when her 2003 Honda finally died and she couldn't get to work anymore, for the inevitable disaster that seemed to lurk around every corner of her life. But 8 acres of land, even with a destroyed water tower on it, even in the middle of nowhere, Montana. Land had value, didn't it? She could sell it, maybe find someone who wanted to build something, or scrap the metal from the tower itself. Still had to be worth something. Elena pulled up the satellite view on her phone, zooming in on the coordinates listed in the auction posting. The image was grainy, clearly several years old, but she could make out the tower rising from a cleared area surrounded by pine forest. It was one of those old-style water towers, the kind that looked like a massive metal mushroom, a cylindrical tank supported by steel legs. The kind you saw in small towns across rural America, holding anywhere from 50,000 to 200,000 gallons of water, gravity-fed to the community below. This one looked huge, even from the satellite image. The kind of structure that had probably served the long-defunct copper mining operation that had once sustained Copper Falls. The town itself was barely a town anymore. Population maybe 300 on a good day, most of them elderly folks who'd never left, and young people too broke to escape. Her phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Chun, the neighbor who watched Mateo after school for $20 a day that Elena could barely afford. Your boy is coughing again. Not bad yet, but wanted you to know. Elena's stomach clenched. Mateo was 6 years old, small for his age, with lungs that seemed to reject Montana's cold air the way her body had rejected his father, violently and without negotiation. The inhaler sitting in her purse was down to maybe 10 doses. The refill would cost $180 even with her insurance, and her insurance was the kind that barely qualified as insurance at all. She had 8 minutes left on her lunch break. She made a decision that was probably stupid, probably reckless, but felt like the only decision she could make. She navigated to the auction website, created an account, and placed a bid. $500. The minimum. Everything in her screamed that this was a mistake, that she was gambling with money she couldn't lose, that destroyed water towers didn't hold opportunities. They held demolished dreams and scrap metal. But Elena Martinez had been raised by a mother who'd crossed the border with nothing but determination and died believing her daughter would have better. She'd been married at 19 to a man who'd promised forever and delivered 2 years before disappearing with another woman and all the money in their joint account. She'd given birth to Mateo alone in a hospital room, held him while he struggled to breathe through his first asthma attack, worked 3 jobs to keep him fed and housed and medicated. She was 31 years old, broke beyond broke, exhausted down to her bones, and so tired of being afraid. If a $500 water tower was her chance at something different, she was taking it. The confirmation email arrived instantly. Bid accepted. Pending auction close on Friday at 6 p.m. If no higher bids received, property will transfer to Elena Martinez upon payment. She sat in her car for another minute, hands shaking, wondering what she'd just done. Then she shoved her phone in her pocket, threw away her uneaten dollar menu burger, and walked back into the nursing home, where she spent 8 hours a day changing bedpans and listening to people slowly forget who they were. But for the first time in months, maybe years, something like hope flickered in her chest. Friday came. Elena checked the auction site 17 times throughout her shift. No other bids. At 6:07 p.m., she received the notification. Congratulations. Lot 847 awarded to Elena Martinez. Payment due within 48 hours. Instructions for property transfer attached. She sat in the nursing home break room, staring at her phone while her coworker Jamie microwaved leftover pasta and complained about her boyfriend. Elena had just bought a condemned water tower in the middle of nowhere, Montana. She had no idea what she was going to do with it. No idea if she'd just made the best or worst decision of her life. That weekend, after paying the $500 and signing documents she barely understood, after receiving a deed that felt both official and absurd, Elena drove north toward Copper Falls with Mateo strapped in the back seat, his inhaler tucked in the cup holder between them. The highway was empty, cutting through forest that stretched endlessly in both directions. They passed abandoned mining operations, rusted equipment slowly being reclaimed by nature, buildings with caved-in roofs and windows like empty eye sockets. Copper Falls itself was exactly as depressing as Elena had imagined. A main street with more closed businesses than open ones. A gas station that looked like it hadn't been updated since 1987. A diner with a neon sign advertising breakfast all day and suspicious stains on the windows. Population 287 according to the faded sign at the town limits. The mining access road was barely a road at all. Gravel and potholes and drainage ditches that could swallow her Honda whole. Elena drove slowly, branches scraping the sides of her car, Mateo silent in the back seat, his small face pressed against the window. They drove for 20 minutes before the forest opened up and Elena saw it. The water tower rose against the gray November sky like something out of a dystopian movie. It was massive, far larger than it had appeared in the satellite image. The tank itself was easily 60 feet in diameter, supported by 6 enormous steel legs that had to be 70 feet tall. The whole structure was maybe 90 feet from ground to the top of the tank. It had once been painted. She could see traces of faded red and white, but most of the surface was rust now, great streaks of orange and brown that made the tower look like it was bleeding. The lightning damage was immediately visible. One entire section of the tank had been blown open, metal peeled back like a sardine can, revealing the dark interior. The blast had traveled down through one of the support legs, cracking it nearly in half. The whole structure tilted slightly to one side, listing like a sinking ship frozen in time. Elena parked and got out slowly. The November wind cut through her thin jacket, carrying the smell of pine and rust and something else, something chemical she couldn't identify. Mateo climbed out after her, his small hand finding hers immediately. "Mama, it's huge," he whispered. His voice always got quiet when he was overwhelmed. "Why did you buy this?" Good question, Elena thought. She had no answer that made sense. Because sometimes you have to take chances, Mijo. Come on, let's look around. The property was mostly cleared, the 8 acres extending into the tree line on all sides. There was a small concrete building near the base of the tower, maybe a pump house or control station from when the tower had been operational. Its door hung open, hinges rusted through. Elena peered inside and saw nothing but debris, old equipment, rodent droppings, and water stains on every surface. The base of the tower itself was surrounded by a chain-link fence, mostly collapsed now, posts leaning at drunken angles. Warning signs were posted every few feet. Condemned. No trespassing. Structural failure. Entry prohibited. They were dated 2019, 5 years ago. The tower had been sitting here abandoned for at least that long, probably longer. Elena walked around the perimeter, studying the support legs. They were massive, at least 4 feet in diameter, made of riveted steel plates that had to be inches thick. Even damaged, even rusted, the tower was an engineering marvel. Someone had built this to last, to hold hundreds of thousands of gallons of water and gravity feed it to the mining operation below. This wasn't some cheap construction. This was serious infrastructure from an era when things were built to endure. "Can we go inside?" Matteo asked. He was looking at the ladder that ran up one of the support legs, a rusted metal spine stretching toward the tank 70 feet above. "Absolutely not," Elena said firmly. "The whole thing could collapse. We're just looking today, okay? Just seeing what we bought." What they bought was a disaster. Elena could see that clearly now. The scrap value of the metal might cover her initial investment if she was lucky, but demolition would cost thousands. Thousands she didn't have. She'd need permits, probably environmental assessments, heavy equipment, professional contractors. This wasn't an opportunity. This was a money pit that would swallow what little she had. She felt tears threatening and blinked them back hard. Matteo didn't need to see her cry. Matteo needed to believe his mother knew what she was doing, even when she clearly didn't. They walked back toward the car, Elena already mentally calculating how quickly she could list the property for resale, how much of her $500 she might recover. Then Matteo stopped, tugging her hand. "Mama, what's that?" He was pointing at the concrete pump house. Elena had already looked inside, seen nothing but junk. But Matteo was pointing at the floor, at something she'd missed in her quick glance. They walked back over. Elena crouched down, following Matteo's finger. There, partially hidden under fallen debris and what looked like an old tarp, was a seam in the concrete floor. Not a crack, a deliberate seam, straight edges, forming a rectangular outline, maybe 3 feet by 4 feet. Elena's heart started beating faster. She pushed debris aside, uncovering more of the outline. It was definitely intentional. And there, on one side, barely visible under years of grime, was a recessed handle. Metal, rusted but still solid. "Is it a door?" Matteo asked, his voice filled with the kind of wonder only 6-year-olds could maintain in the face of rust and decay. "I think it might be," Elena said softly. She grabbed the handle and pulled. Nothing happened. She tried again, using her weight, her legs, everything she had. The concrete panel didn't budge. It was either locked from below or welded shut by rust and time. Elena sat back, breathing hard. Her mind was racing. Why would there be a hatch in the floor of a pump house? Storage, maybe. Access to underground pipes. Could be anything. Could be nothing. But it was there, hidden, deliberately concealed. She looked up at the tower looming above them, at the damaged tank with its peeled-back metal, at the support legs that had held firm for probably 70 years despite lightning and rust and abandonment. Someone had built this place with care, with resources, with purpose beyond just storing water. "We need to come back," Elena said, standing and brushing dirt from her jeans. "With tools. Better light. We need to see what's down there." "Is it treasure?" Matteo asked, his eyes wide with possibility. Elena wanted to laugh, wanted to tell him that real life didn't work like stories, that condemned water towers didn't hold treasure, that their lives weren't the kind where luck happened. But looking at her son, at his small face full of hope, she couldn't crush that. Not yet. Reality would do that soon enough. "I don't know, Mijo," she said honestly, "but we're going to find out." They drove back to town as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Elena's mind wouldn't stop working, turning over possibilities. The hatch could contain old equipment, could be septic access, could be absolutely nothing worth the effort of opening it, but could also be something that justified the $500 she'd gambled, something that proved her instinct had been right. That night, after putting Matteo to bed in their tiny apartment, after checking his breathing and making sure his inhaler was within reach, Elena sat at her kitchen table and searched for information about the Copper Falls water tower. What she found was sparse but intriguing. The tower had been built in 1952 by the Copper Falls Mining Company, a subsidiary of a larger corporation called Mountain West Resources. The mine had operated for nearly 40 years, pulling copper and small amounts of silver from the Montana earth. At its peak in the 1960s, Copper Falls had employed over 800 workers. The water tower served not just the mining operation, but the entire town that had grown up around it. The mine had closed in 1989 when the copper deposits ran dry and the company declared bankruptcy. Most of the workers left. The town dwindled. The water tower was decommissioned in 1991 when the town built a modern water treatment facility. The tower had sat in use since then, slowly rusting, slowly being forgotten. But there were gaps in the record, periods where the tower seemed to have been accessed, maintained, even though it was officially abandoned. There were mentions in old county meeting minutes of security concerns and unauthorized access in the late 1990s. A report from 2003 about the tower being inspected by federal authorities for reasons that weren't specified. Then nothing until the lightning strike in 2019 that had finally condemned it completely. Elena leaned back, staring at her laptop screen. Unauthorized access, federal inspection, security concerns. None of that made sense for an abandoned water tower, unless it had been used for something other than water storage. Unless someone had been using it, hiding something there, keeping something secret. She was probably imagining things, seeing patterns where there were none, making up stories because she desperately wanted this disaster to mean something. But the hatch in the pump house floor was real. That wasn't imagination. That was concrete and metal and deliberate construction. Monday morning, Elena called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years. She dropped Mateo at school, then drove to the hardware store and bought a crowbar, a heavy-duty flashlight, work gloves, and a face mask in case of mold or asbestos. The total came to $67, money she couldn't spare, but she was committed now. She needed to know what was beneath that hatch. The drive to the tower felt longer in daylight. Elena kept second-guessing herself. This was stupid. She should be at work. Should be earning the $14 an hour that kept her and Mateo housed and fed. Instead, she was driving toward a rusted tower in the wilderness, chasing a mystery that probably didn't exist. But she kept driving. The tower looked even more ominous in the gray morning light. The damaged section seemed larger, more dangerous. The listing more pronounced. Elena parked and gathered her tools, then walked to the pump house with a determination that felt half courage, half stubbornness. The hatch was exactly where she remembered it. She'd been half afraid she'd imagined it, that her desperate mind had conjured hope from nothing. But it was real, solid, waiting. Elena put on her work gloves and wedged the crowbar into the seam between the hatch and the floor. She leveraged her weight against it, felt the metal bite into the concrete, felt resistance, and then suddenly give. The hatch shifted just slightly, just enough to tell her it could move. She worked the crowbar around the perimeter, breaking the seal of rust and time. 15 minutes of hard labor, and the hatch lifted an inch. Then 2 inches. Then, with a final heave that pulled something in her back, it swung open completely, revealing a dark square opening and a ladder descending into blackness. Cold air rushed up from below, carrying smells that made Elena step back. Concrete and metal and earth. Something chemical, vaguely sweet. Something old and undisturbed. She turned on her flashlight and aimed it down. The ladder descended about 12 feet before reaching what looked like a concrete floor. The space below appeared to be a room, walls made of poured concrete, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. She could see shapes in the darkness, but couldn't make out details from above. Every survival instinct Elena had screamed at her not to go down there. Unknown spaces, bad air, potential collapse. She should call someone. Should get professional help. Should do literally anything except climb down a rusty ladder into a hole under an abandoned water tower. But if she called someone, if she told anyone what she'd found, it wouldn't be hers anymore. Whatever was down there, whatever secrets this place held, they'd be taken away, studied by people with credentials and resources. Elena would be lucky to get mentioned in a footnote. She thought about Mateo's inhaler running low, about the overdue rent notice on her kitchen table, about spending the rest of her life changing bedpans and scraping by, about being 31 years old and broken down and invisible, about taking a chance, just one chance, at something different. Elena tested the ladder. The rungs held. She turned on her flashlight, held it between her teeth, and started climbing down. The ladder was cold under Elena's gloved hands, each rung solid despite the rust. She descended slowly, testing each step before committing her weight. The flashlight beam bounced with every movement, creating dizzying shadows on the concrete walls. 12 feet down felt like descending into another world, the temperature dropping with each step, the air growing thicker, heavier. Her boots touched solid ground. Elena stood still for a moment, letting her eyes adjust, sweeping the flashlight around the space. What she saw made her breath catch. It wasn't just a room. It was a vault. The walls were reinforced concrete, at least a foot thick by the look of the construction. The ceiling was supported by steel I-beams, industrial grade, meant to hold serious weight. This wasn't storage. This was protection. This was something built to last, to hide, to preserve. The space was larger than she'd thought from above, maybe 15 by 15 feet. And it wasn't empty. Along one wall stood metal shelving units, military style, the kind designed for heavy loads. On those shelves sat boxes, dozens of them, each one sealed with thick plastic and labeled with numbers and codes Elena didn't understand. She approached the nearest shelf and pulled down one of the boxes. It was heavier than expected, the plastic wrapping intact despite years or decades of storage. Through the clear covering, she could see stacks of something inside. Paper, maybe documents. Elena set the box on the concrete floor and carefully tore through the plastic seal. Inside were bundles of papers wrapped in more protective covering. She pulled one out and unwrapped it with shaking hands. Money. It was money, but not regular bills. These were stock certificates, the old-fashioned kind, ornate borders and official seals and signatures. Elena stared at the top certificate, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Mountain West Resources. Corporation. 1,000 shares. Issued to bearer. Dated 1987. Her heart was pounding now. She opened another bundle. More certificates. Different companies this time. Mining operations, manufacturing firms, some names she recognized, most she didn't. All from the 1980s and early 1990s. All marked bearer, which meant, if she understood correctly, that whoever held the physical certificate owned the shares. Elena's hands were trembling so badly she almost dropped the bundle. She set it down carefully and moved to another box. This one contained something different. Bonds. U.S. Treasury bonds, each one worth $10,000 according to the denomination printed on the paper. She counted quickly. 50 bonds in the first bundle. That was $500,000, just in that one bundle. And there were dozens more bundles in the box. She opened box after box, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. Stock certificates representing ownership in companies she'd never heard of. Bearer bonds from when the U.S. still issued them. Corporate bonds from mining operations and manufacturing plants. Some of the paper was yellowed with age, but all of it had been carefully preserved, protected from moisture and decay. On the far side of the vault, Elena found something different. Leather bags, the kind banks used to use for transporting cash. She opened one with shaking hands and found exactly what she expected. Bundled currency. $100 bills, older style, from the 1980s and 1990s. The bills were crisp, clean, perfectly preserved. She counted one bundle quickly. $10,000. The bag held 20 bundles. That was $200,000 in one bag. And there were 6 bags. Elena sat down hard on the cold concrete floor, her legs suddenly unable to support her. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be real. She was hallucinating, suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning, dreaming in her bed back in town. Because condemned water towers did not contain vaults full of stocks and bonds and cash. That didn't happen to broke, single mothers from Montana. That didn't happen in real life. But the concrete was solid under her. The cold air was real. The bundles of currency in her shaking hands had weight and texture. This was happening. She forced herself to breathe, to think. Someone had hidden this here. Someone had built this vault under the water tower, had filled it with assets, had sealed it up and left it. The question was who and why, and whether they'd ever plan to come back. Elena stood on unsteady legs and continued her exploration. Against another wall, she found metal filing cabinets, industrial strength, each drawer locked. She used a crowbar to force the first one open. Inside were files, hundreds of them, organized alphabetically. She pulled one at random and found detailed financial records. Transactions, transfers, purchase orders, all related to the Copper Falls Mining Company and its parent corporation, Mountain West Resources. Another drawer held personal documents. Passports, several of them, all issued to the same man, Robert Chun. The photographs showed a Chinese-American man in his 50s or 60s, stern-faced, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. The passports were issued over several years, from 1985 to 1991. All of them had stamps from countries Elena recognized: Switzerland, the Cayman Islands, Hong Kong, Singapore, all known for banking privacy and offshore accounts. A third drawer contained something that made Elena's blood run cold. Newspaper clippings, carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. The headlines told a story. Mountain West Resources files bankruptcy. Federal investigation into mining company finances. CEO Robert Chun missing, presumed dead in plane crash. Investors lost millions in corporate collapse. Elena read through the articles with growing understanding. Mountain West Resources had been a legitimate mining operation that had somehow become entangled with financial crimes. The CEO, Robert Chun, had been accused of embezzlement, of moving company assets offshore, of defrauding investors of hundreds of millions of dollars. In 1991, just as federal prosecutors were preparing charges, Chun had died in a small plane crash in Alaska. His body was never recovered. The stolen money was never found. Until now. Until a broke single mother bought a condemned water tower for $500 and found where Chun had hidden his escape plan. Elena sat among the documents, her mind racing. This vault contained evidence of massive financial fraud. It contained assets that legally belonged to defrauded investors, to the bankruptcy court, to the federal government. If she reported this, if she turned it over to authorities, she'd get nothing. Maybe a finder's fee if she was lucky. Maybe her name in a news article. Maybe thanks from people who'd lost their life savings 33 years ago. Or she could keep quiet. Could take what was here, convert the stocks and bonds, use the cash, build a life for Mateo that didn't involve choosing between rent and medicine. Could finally have security instead of desperation. But even as she thought it, even as the temptation burned bright and fierce, Elena knew she couldn't. Because these assets belonged to people who'd been victims. Because the bonds and stocks represented theft, represented lives ruined by a man who'd chosen greed over ethics. Because taking stolen money, even money that had been hidden for 3 decades, made her a thief too. She was still sitting there, paralyzed by impossible choices, when she heard it. A sound from above. Footsteps. Someone walking across the pump house floor. Elena's heart stopped. She'd left the hatch open, the ladder visible to anyone who approached. She'd been so focused on the vault that she hadn't heard a vehicle arriving, hadn't heard anyone approaching. A voice called down, male, older, careful. "Hello? Someone down there?" Elena grabbed her flashlight and crowbar, positioned herself at the base of the ladder. "I'm the property owner," she called back, trying to sound confident. "This is private property." Silence. Then, "Miss Martinez? Elena Martinez?" Her blood went cold. Someone knew her name. "Who's asking?" "My name is James Chun. I think you found something that belonged to my father." James Chun was 68 years old, wore an expensive coat that looked wrong in the Montana wilderness, and had his father's sharp eyes behind modern glasses. He sat across from Elena in the pump house, both of them on overturned crates, the open hatch between them like a chasm. "I've been looking for this place for 33 years, he said quietly. His voice carried the weight of decades. "Knew my father had hidden something. Knew it had to be connected to Copper Falls. But the tower changed hands so many times. Was sold and resold. I lost track of it. Then I saw the auction listing, saw someone had actually bought it, and I thought maybe, finally, I'd get answers." "How did you know it was me?" Elena asked. Her hand was still on the crowbar, though she didn't know what good it would do against a man who didn't look threatening, just tired. Public records. The deed transfer is recorded with the county. I've been checking weekly for years, waiting for someone to buy this property. James looked at the hatch. May I see what's down there? Elena should have said no, should have protected what she'd found, called the police, done something other than step aside and let this stranger descend into the vault. But there was something in his face, in the way he moved, that spoke of grief rather than greed. She watched him climb down, heard his sharp intake of breath when he saw the shelves, the boxes, the evidence of his father's crimes. When he climbed back up 15 minutes later, tears streaked his face. I always wondered if he'd actually done it, James said, his voice broken. The prosecutor said he stole $350 million. Said he'd moved it offshore, converted it to bearer instruments, planned to disappear and live like a king somewhere without extradition. When he died in that plane crash, when they never found the money, part of me hoped they'd been wrong. That my father hadn't been the monster they said he was. He sat heavily on the crate, suddenly looking much older than 68. He ruined people, Miss Martinez, investors who trusted him, employees who lost their pensions. My mother died of a heart attack during the investigation from the stress and shame. I spent 30 years trying to rebuild the family name, trying to make amends for what he did. And all that time, all that stolen money was sitting right here, 12 feet underground. Elena watched him, saw genuine anguish, and felt something shift in her chest. What do you want? She asked quietly. James looked at her, seemed to really see her for the first time. Saw her discount store clothes, her worn hands, her tired face. I want to do what's right, he said, which is more than my father ever wanted. Those stocks, those bonds, they belong to the people he defrauded, to the bankruptcy estate, to history. And if I'd already taken them? Elena asked. If I'd found this yesterday and converted everything and disappeared? James smiled sadly. Then you'd be like him. But you didn't. You're still here, still trying to figure out what to do. That tells me you're nothing like Robertson. They sat in silence while the wind rattled the pump house walls. Elena thought about Mateo, about the life she could give him with even a fraction of what was in that vault. Thought about security, about never being afraid of rent or medicine or unexpected emergencies. Thought about the choice between doing what was right and doing what would save them. If we report this, Elena said slowly, what happens? Federal authorities take over. FBI probably. They'll catalog everything, verify authenticity, trace ownership. The bankruptcy court will likely claim most of it. Individual victims might receive restitution. James paused. You'll get nothing except maybe some news coverage and a pat on the back. And if we don't report it, then we're complicit in hiding stolen assets. We're participants in my father's crimes. James met her eyes. I've spent 3 decades trying to be better than him, Miss Martinez. I can't stop now. Elena wanted to hate him for his principles, for making the right choice seem so easy when it felt impossible to her. But she understood. Some things mattered more than comfort. Some choices defined who you were. There's something else down there, she said quietly. Documents, financial records, evidence of how he did it, where the money came from, who he defrauded. Everything the investigators couldn't prove. James's eyes widened. May I see them? They descended together into the vault. Elena watched as James went through the filing cabinets, saw his face cycle through shock and grief and something like relief. This proves everything, he said, holding up files with shaking hands. Names of investors, amounts stolen, transfer dates. Everything the prosecutors needed but never found. With this, the bankruptcy court could finally provide restitution. People could get back at least some of what they lost. He turned to Elena. How much do you estimate is down here? Total value? Elena had been trying not to calculate, but the numbers were burned in her brain. The cash alone is maybe $1 million too. The bonds, if they're still valid, could be worth 70 or 80 million. The stocks. She paused, thinking about some of the companies she'd seen. Some of these corporations don't exist anymore, but others grew, merged, became part of larger companies. If the shares are legitimate, if ownership can be established, could be worth 200 million or more. Maybe closer to 300. 356 million, James said softly. That was the exact amount the prosecutors said he stole. He converted it all, stored it all, hid it all right here under a water tower in Montana. He laughed, but it was hollow. That's actually brilliant in a horrible way. Who would think to look here? In a functioning water tower, serving an active mining town? By the time the town died and the tower was abandoned, the investigation was closed. My father was declared dead. The money was written off as lost forever. Until I bought a condemned water tower for $500, Elena said. James looked at her, really looked at her, and something changed in his expression. Miss Martinez, I need to ask you something important. Do you trust me? I don't even know you. Fair, but I need you to make a choice. We could call the FBI right now. Report everything. Let them handle it according to legal procedure. You'll get nothing, I'll get nothing, and the victims might see some restitution in 5 or 10 years after court battles and legal fees eat up half the value. Or, Elena asked, because she could hear there was an alternative. Or we document everything ourselves. We preserve the evidence, and we find the victims directly. People my father defrauded. We track them down, verify their losses, and we give them what they're owed. Directly. No courts, no lawyers, no bureaucracy. James leaned forward. It's not completely legal. The bankruptcy court has legal claim to these assets. But morally, these people deserve restitution, and they deserve it while they're still alive to benefit from it. Elena's mind was racing. That's insane. We'd be stealing from a bankruptcy estate. We'd be ensuring victims receive what they're owed instead of watching lawyers drain the accounts dry. James pulled out his phone, showed her something. A website for a victims advocacy group. There are still survivors. Miss Martinez, people my father destroyed. Some of them are in nursing homes now, living on nothing because he took their retirement accounts. Some lost their homes, their savings, everything. They're in their 80s and 90s. They don't have time for court proceedings. Elena stared at the website, at photographs of elderly people, at testimonials about lives ruined by financial fraud. She thought about the nursing home where she worked, about residents who had nothing, who'd outlived their money and now survived on government assistance, and the charity of family who couldn't really afford to help. How would it even work? She asked. I have the records from the original investigation. I've kept every document, every victim statement. I can cross-reference with what's down here, verify who lost what. We convert the assets quietly through channels I have access to. Then we distribute funds directly to victims. Anonymous donations. Untraceable. We give people back what was stolen without making them jump through legal hoops. And we'd keep what? As payment for our moral flexibility? James shook his head. I don't want anything except to make this right. You, however, should be compensated. You found this. You own the property. Legally, one could argue finder's rights. I'd say 10% is fair. 10% of $356 million was $35 million. More money than Elena could comprehend. Enough to transform not just her life, but Mateo's future, his education, his opportunities, everything. Enough to make every struggle, every sacrifice, every desperate choice worthwhile. But it meant breaking the law, meant keeping secrets, meant becoming part of cover-up, even if the cover-up served justice better than legal channels would. I need to think, Elena said. Of course, but think quickly. I've waited 33 years for this. I can wait a few more days. But if you decide to report this officially, I won't stop you. I'll support whatever you choose. They climbed out of the vault together. James gave her his contact information, shook her hand with a grip that was firm despite his age, and drove away in a rental car that looked too clean for Montana roads. Elena sat in her Honda for a long time, staring at the water tower, trying to decide who she wanted to be. That night, after picking up Mateo from school, after making dinner with the last of their groceries, after checking his breathing and making sure his inhaler was where he could reach it, Elena sat at her kitchen table and did what she always did when facing impossible decisions. She made a list. Reasons to report the vault officially. 1. Legal obligation. 2. Bankruptcy court has rightful claim. 3. Avoid criminal liability. 4. Do things the right way. 5. Sleep at night, knowing she followed the law reasons to work with James. 1. Victims get restitution faster too. Victims get more money, no legal fees. 3. Mateo's future secured. 4. Actually help people who were hurt. 5. Honor the spirit of justice, even if not the letter. She stared at the lists, at the clear rational choice versus the complicated moral one. Then she added one more line under the second list. 6. Sometimes the right thing isn't the legal thing. Elena thought about the nursing home residents she cared for, about people who'd worked their whole lives and had nothing to show for it, about systems that claimed to serve justice but mostly served lawyers and bureaucrats. She thought about her mother crossing the border to give her daughter a better life, breaking laws to follow a deeper moral code. She thought about Mateo, about the boy he was and the man he could become, about teaching him that rules mattered, yes, but people mattered more, that sometimes you had to break small laws to serve larger justice. She picked up her phone and texted James Chun. I'm in. But we do this right. Every victim gets documentation. Every dollar accounted for. No one gets rich except the people who were robbed. His response came immediately. Agreed. Tomorrow we start the real work. Elena put her phone down and walked to Mateo's room, watched him sleep with his inhaler on the nightstand beside him. She'd just agreed to participate in something that could destroy her if it went wrong, that could end with prison time and Mateo in foster care, and her mother's sacrifices rendered meaningless. But she'd also chosen to help people who'd been hurt, to ensure that victims received justice, even if it came from unconventional sources. She'd chosen to believe that sometimes the system failed and ordinary people had to step up and make things right. I hope I'm doing the right thing, she whispered to her sleeping son. I hope you understand someday. The next week was a blur of activity that Elena had to hide from everyone in her life. She continued working at the nursing home, continued dropping Mateo at school, continued maintaining the appearance of her normal, struggling existence. But every spare moment was spent at the water tower with James, cataloging the vault's contents with meticulous care. James brought equipment, professional cameras, document scanners, archive-quality storage containers. They photographed every stock certificate, every bond, every piece of paper in the filing cabinets. They created a digital archive of everything, backed up in 3 separate secure locations. They worked with the precision of archaeologists, treating each item as both evidence and artifact. The total value, once they'd finished calculating, was staggering. $356,412,817. James had been right down to the specific amount. Robert Chun had converted his stolen fortune with precise calculation, every dollar accounted for. He was brilliant, James said one afternoon, sitting among the sordid assets. Absolutely brilliant and completely evil. Look at how he did this. He moved money through shell corporations, converted it through legitimate banking channels, timed everything perfectly. By the time investigators realized what was happening, it was already hidden, and then he faked his death. James shook his head. Or maybe he didn't. Maybe the plane crash was real. Maybe he died before he could retrieve any of this, and it's been sitting here for 3 decades waiting to be found. Do you think he suffered? Elena asked. In the crash? I hope so, James said quietly. I hope he had time to realize he destroyed lives, including his own family's, for money he'd never get to spend. I hope his last thought was regret. They worked in silence after that, the weight of Robert Chin's choices pressing down on them. Converting the assets proved easier than Elena had expected, which probably should have worried her. James had connections, knew people who specialized in handling complicated financial instruments. Bearer bonds were technically outlawed now, but the old ones could still be redeemed through certain channels if you knew who to ask. Stock certificates could be digitized, authenticated, transferred. Cash was the simplest. It just needed to be moved carefully, quietly, in amounts that wouldn't trigger reporting requirements. The process took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of Elena lying to everyone she knew, of secret meetings and encrypted communications and transactions she didn't fully understand but trusted James to handle ethically. 6 weeks of living with the knowledge that she was committing serious crimes for what she believed was a moral purpose. And then it was done. The vault was empty. The assets were converted into accounts James controlled. And they had a list of 63 victims, people Robert Chun had personally defrauded, people who were still alive, whose losses could be documented and verified. "Tomorrow we start distributions," James said. They were sitting in his rental car outside Elena's apartment building, reviewing the final plans. Anonymous wire transfers, untraceable donations, cashier's checks delivered by courier. Each victim gets what they lost, plus interest calculated at market rates. Some will receive hundreds of thousands. A few will receive millions. And they'll just accept anonymous money? Elena asked. If you'd lost your life savings 30 years ago and suddenly received a payment with a note saying restitution for Mountain West Resources fraud, would you call the police or would you cash the check? Elena had to admit she'd cashed the check. What about the remaining money? After all victims are paid? James pulled out a spreadsheet, showed her calculations. After restitution and expenses, there will be approximately $42 million remaining. I propose we donate it to a fund for victims of financial fraud, people who lost everything and never received justice. We can establish it anonymously, ensure it helps people beyond just my father's victims. No, Elena said quietly. James looked surprised. No, you take half, 21 million. You spent 33 years trying to make amends for your father's crimes. You deserve to benefit from making this right. I don't want his money. It's not his money anymore. It's restitution, paid by his estate, distributed by his son who chose ethics over self-interest. That's worth compensation. Elena met his eyes. Take it, James. Build something good with it. That's better revenge against your father than poverty. James's eyes filled with tears. And you? You were promised 10%. I'll take the other 21 million, Elena said, the numbers still not feeling real. For Mateo's future. For security. For never being afraid again. They shook hands, two strangers brought together by a condemned water tower and a vault full of secrets, now partners in vigilante justice and financial crimes committed in the service of doing right. The distributions began the next day. Elena watched from James's laptop as money moved through electronic systems, as decades-old wrongs were quietly corrected. She saw confirmation that an 87-year-old woman in Florida had received $842,000, her stolen retirement account restored with interest. Saw that a couple in Arizona got $1, $2 million, enough to cover medical expenses their children had been carrying for years. Saw victim after victim receiving what they were owed. Some of them are crying, James said, reading emails that came back through anonymous channels. An 82-year-old man wrote to the unknown sender saying this money means he can stop working as a Walmart greeter. He can finally retire with dignity. Elena felt tears on her own face. This was why they'd done it this way. This was why breaking laws sometimes served justice better than following them. But not everyone was grateful. 3 weeks into the distribution process, as they were nearing completion, James received a call that made his face go pale. He put it on speaker so Elena could hear. "Mr. Chun, this is Special Agent Victoria Rodriguez with the FBI. We need to speak with you about some unusual financial activity we've been tracking." James's hand was shaking as he held the phone. Elena could see the fear in his eyes, the sudden realization that their careful planning might have had flaws they hadn't anticipated. But his voice when he spoke was steady, controlled. "Special Agent Rodriguez, I'm happy to speak with you. What unusual activity are you referring to?" "I think you know, Mr. Chun. We've tracked approximately $300 million moving through various accounts over the past 6 weeks. The money appears to be connected to the Mountain West Resources bankruptcy case from 1991, a case involving your father." Elena's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. This was it. They were caught. She'd been so stupid, so reckless. Mateo was going to lose his mother to prison. Everything she tried to build was about to collapse. But James remained calm. "Agent Rodriguez, I'd be happy to discuss this, but I think it would be better in person. Where are you located?" "I'm actually in Montana. In Copper Falls, to be specific. Standing in front of a condemned water tower that I believe is central to this investigation. A pause. I think we should meet. There's a diner in town. The Copper Falls Cafe. Can you be there in an hour? I'll be there, James said, and hung up. Elena grabbed his arm. We need to run. We need to stay calm. James interrupted. If she wanted to arrest us, she would have led with that. She wants to talk. That means we have leverage. What leverage? We stole $300 million from a bankruptcy estate. We distributed stolen money to the people it was stolen from, James corrected. That's not quite the same thing legally, and it's very different morally. Come on, we're going to meet her. Are you insane? I'm not walking into an FBI trap. James looked at her with surprising gentleness. Elena, we always knew this was a possibility. We did what we did knowing we might face consequences. Now we face them together, and we tell the truth. Sometimes that's all you can do. They drove to the Copper Falls Cafe in silence. Elena texted Mrs. Chun to keep Mateo for the evening, saying she had an emergency at work. It wasn't entirely a lie. This was definitely an emergency. Special Agent Victoria Rodriguez was exactly what Elena had pictured. Late 40s, professional suit that looked wrong in the rundown diner, sharp eyes that missed nothing. She sat in a back booth with a cup of coffee she clearly hadn't touched, watching them approach with an expression Elena couldn't read. Mr. Chun, and you must be Elena Martinez, the woman who bought the water tower. Victoria gestured to the seats across from her. Please sit. We have a lot to discuss. They sat. Elena felt like she was moving through water, everything slow and heavy and wrong. This was where her life ended, where all her choices caught up with her. Before you say anything, Victoria began, pulling out a folder. I want to show you something. She spread photographs across the table. They showed the vault under the pump house, the empty shelves, the filing cabinets. We've been monitoring that property for 16 years. Elena's head snapped up. What? The FBI never closed the Mountain West Resources investigation. We knew Robertson had hidden assets somewhere. We tracked the property through multiple sales, waiting for someone to find what he'd buried. When Miss Martinez purchased it 6 weeks ago, we intensified our surveillance. When you two started visiting regularly, started removing materials, we watched. We documented everything. James's voice was tight. So you have enough to arrest us? Yes, Victoria said simply. Multiple felonies. Theft from a bankruptcy estate, money laundering, wire fraud, conspiracy. You'd both go to prison for a long time. She paused. But I'm not here to arrest you. Elena found her voice. Then why are you here? Victoria leaned back, studying them. Because I've spent 23 years with the FBI investigating financial crimes, and I've learned something important. The system is broken. We recover stolen assets, tie them up in court for years, watch legal fees drain everything of value, and victims get pennies on the dollar if they're lucky. Meanwhile, the criminals who stole from them often die comfortable. Their families keep their wealth, and justice becomes a word without meaning. She pulled out more papers. I've been tracking the distributions you've made. Every transfer, every payment. And I've been cross-referencing with victim statements from the original case. You're giving people back exactly what they lost, adjusted for inflation and interest. You're doing what the justice system was supposed to do, but never could. James spoke carefully. That sounds like you're saying what we did was right. What you did was illegal, Victoria corrected. But illegal and wrong aren't always the same thing. I have to enforce the law. That's my job. But I also have discretion in how I enforce it, and I have a choice about what I report and when. Elena didn't dare hope, but something in Victoria's tone made her ask, What are you proposing? Victoria pulled out a legal document, multiple pages, dense with text. This is a settlement agreement I drafted. Unofficial, not filed with any court, completely off the books. Here's how it works. You continue the restitution payments to all verified victims. Every person Robertson defrauded gets made whole. You document everything, provide me with complete records. In exchange, I delay my official report to the bankruptcy court until all victims have been paid. And then what? James asked. Then I report that an anonymous source provided information leading to the recovery of assets. The bankruptcy court takes custody of whatever remains, which, if you've been honest about your distribution plans, will be the donated funds you mentioned. Victims have already been paid, so the court can't claw back those payments. The remaining money goes to the Fraud Victims Fund, as you intended. Everyone wins, except the lawyers who would have billed millions in fees. Elena's mind was spinning. This is entrapment or witness tampering or something illegal, isn't it? Victoria smiled slightly. It's creative interpretation of investigative timelines and prosecutorial discretion. I'm not asking you to do anything you weren't already planning. I'm just proposing we coordinate our efforts to maximize victim restitution while minimizing legal complications. Why would you do this? James asked. Risk your career for strangers? Victoria's expression shifted, became something harder, older. My mother lost everything to a financial fraud scheme in 2008. The man who stole her retirement savings went to prison for 3 years and got out early for good behavior. She died broke, living in my spare bedroom, having lost her home and her dignity. The justice system failed her completely. She met their eyes. I became an FBI agent to prevent that from happening to others. Sometimes that means working within the system. Sometimes it means being creative about how I interpret my obligations. They sat in silence for a long moment. Then James asked the crucial question, what do you get out of this? I get to close a 33-year-old case. I get to tell the families of victims that justice was finally served. I get to sleep at night knowing I did the right thing, even if it wasn't the legal thing. Victoria paused. And I get to make sure no one goes to prison for giving stolen money back to the people it was stolen from. Elena looked at James, saw her own cautious hope reflected in his face. How do we know we can trust you? You don't, Victoria said honestly. But you don't have better options. Sign this agreement, complete the restitution payments, and there's a good chance this ends with victims getting justice and both of you staying free. Don't sign it. And I file my official report tomorrow. The bankruptcy court seizes all remaining assets, ties everything up in litigation for years, and you both face federal charges. She slid the document across the table. Your choice. James picked up the agreement, read through it carefully. Elena watched his face, saw him processing legal language, weighing risks, calculating odds. Finally, he looked at her. What do you think? What did she think? She thought this was insane. She thought trusting an FBI agent who was offering to help them commit crimes was probably the stupidest decision she could make. She thought her mother would tell her to run, to take Mateo and disappear, to never look back. But she also thought about the victims who'd received restitution, about the elderly man who could finally retire, about the woman who'd gotten her life savings back after 30 years. She thought about doing the right thing, even when it was terrifying. She thought about trust, about choosing to believe that sometimes the system worked because good people made it work. I think we sign it, Elena said quietly. James nodded and picked up the pen Victoria offered. He signed his name, then passed the document to Elena. Her hand was shaking as she wrote her signature, committing herself to this strange alliance, this illegal cooperation in the service of justice. Victoria witnessed both signatures, then made copies and handed them each one. Okay, here's how this works going forward. You complete all remaining restitution payments within 2 weeks. You provide me with complete documentation. Every victim, every payment, every asset conversion. I verify everything against case files. Once all victims are paid, you transfer the remaining funds to the charity account. Then I file my official report stating that recovered assets have been distributed and the case is closed. What if something goes wrong? Elena asked. What if another agent finds out what we're doing? Then we're all in trouble, Victoria admitted, which is why we move fast and keep this between us. No one else knows about this agreement. If questioned, I'll say I was building a case, gathering evidence, following leads. You'll say you were cooperating with a federal investigation. We all stick to that story and hope it holds. They spent the next 2 hours going through details, reviewing victim lists, confirming payment schedules. Victoria was thorough, professional, asking questions that made Elena realize how much the agent had already uncovered through her surveillance. But there was something else too, a passion, a commitment to making this work that went beyond duty. When they finally left the diner, night had fallen over Copper Falls. Elena walked to her car on shaking legs, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. They'd been caught, confronted by the FBI, and somehow emerged with an ally instead of handcuffs. That was either the best or worst thing that could have happened, James said, standing beside his rental car. I honestly can't tell which, Elena admitted. Me either. But we're committed now. 2 weeks to finish this. They worked faster after that, driven by deadlines and the knowledge that Victoria was watching, verifying, building her own case file to protect them all if things went wrong. The remaining restitution payments went out in a flurry of wire transfers and anonymous checks. Elena watched the victim count climb. 40 victims paid, 50, 60. Some of the responses that came back through anonymous channels made her cry. A 79-year-old woman wrote that she'd been living on $900 a month Social Security, eating one meal a day to afford her medications. The $340,000 restitution payment meant she could actually live her final years with dignity. A man in his 80s sent a note saying he'd been working as a night janitor to pay medical bills from his wife's cancer treatment. The $890,000 payment meant he could finally retire and spend whatever time his wife had left actually being with her instead of cleaning office buildings at 2 a.m. This is why we did it, James said one evening as they reviewed the responses. This right here. These people deserve this money more than any bankruptcy court or legal system. On day 13, with 1 day to spare before Victoria's deadline, the final payment went out. 63 victims, every single person Robert Chun had defrauded, had received full restitution plus interest. The total distributed was $314 million. The remaining $42 million was transferred to a newly established charity fund for financial fraud victims, managed by trustees who had no idea where the seed money had come from. Elena sat in her apartment that night, staring at her bank account. $21 million. The money had been transferred that afternoon, divided from James's share, deposited into an account that was legally hers. $21 million that could change everything. She thought about Mateo, about private schools and college funds and medical care without fear. Thought about never working herself to exhaustion again, never choosing between rent and food, never lying awake at night terrified of emergencies she couldn't afford. Thought about security, about comfort, about the life her mother had crossed a border to provide. But she also thought about where the money came from, about Robert Chun stealing it from people who'd trusted him, about the victims who'd suffered for 30 years. The money had been cleaned, redistributed, given to the right people. But it still carried weight, still held the memory of crimes committed. Could she spend it? Could she use stolen money to build Mateo's future, even if the theft had been corrected, the victims made whole? Was it ethical to benefit from finding what Robert Chun had hidden? Her phone rang. Victoria. All payments verified. The agent said without preamble. Every victim accounted for. The charity fund is established. I'm filing my report tomorrow morning. As far as the FBI is concerned, this case is closed. Just like that. Elena asked. Just like that. You're clear, Elena. Both of you. The money in your accounts is compensation for finding lost assets and cooperating with the investigation. Completely legal, completely defensible if anyone ever asks. Which they won't. After Victoria hung up, Elena sat in silence for a long time. Then she opened her laptop and started researching. Private schools in Montana. College savings plans. Investment strategies for people who suddenly had money but no experience managing it. Medical insurance that would actually cover Mateo's asthma without forcing her to ration his medication. She was allowed to use this money, allowed to build something good from something that had been terrible. The victims had been made whole. Justice had been served. She'd earned this through courage and risk and choosing to do right even when it was illegal. But she'd also do it carefully, ethically, in ways that honored where the money came from. She'd live modestly, invest most of it for Mateo's future, donate to causes that help people like she'd been, broke, desperate, one emergency from disaster. She'd use Robert Chin's stolen fortune to do everything he hadn't. Help people, build communities, create opportunities for those the system had failed. 3 months later, Elena stood in the parking lot of the Copper Falls Water Tower. The structure looked exactly the same, rusted, damaged, listing to one side. But the property around it had changed. The pump house had been renovated, reinforced, turned into a small museum about the town's mining history. The vault beneath had been preserved, cleaned, labeled as a historical site, documenting financial crimes and recovery. It had been James's idea. Instead of demolishing it, let's make it educational. Show people what happened here. Not the crime, but the correction, the restitution, the proof that sometimes justice wins, even if it takes 33 years. The museum would open next month, free admission, operated by a trust funded by Elena and James. It would tell the story of Mountain West Resources, of Robert Chen's fraud, of the victims who'd lost everything. And it would tell the story of recovery, of restitution, of assets found and justice served. Some details would be omitted, of course. The FBI's role will be mentioned only vaguely. Victoria Rodriguez's name wouldn't appear anywhere. The exact method of discovery and distribution would be presented as cooperation with federal authorities, which was technically true if creatively interpreted. Mateo ran up to her, excited. He was 7 now, healthier than he'd ever been thanks to better medical care, growing taller, stronger. "Mom, they're installing the exhibits today. Can we watch?" "Of course, Mijo." Elena took his hand and walked toward the pump house. James was inside, directing contractors, reviewing placard text with historians from the University of Montana. He'd used his share of the money to establish a foundation supporting victims of financial fraud, providing legal assistance and emergency funds to people who'd been defrauded. He'd also endowed a scholarship at his father's alma mater for students studying ethics and business. "Making amends takes many forms," he told Elena. "My father destroyed with his money. I'm going to build with mine." They'd become friends over the months, bound by shared secrets and common purpose. Partners in crime and restoration. Two people who'd chosen to break laws in service of justice and somehow emerged not just free, but empowered to do good. Victoria visited sometimes, unofficial, unannounced. She'd check in, verify that Elena and James were staying clean, that the money was being used as promised. But mostly she'd just talk, share stories about other cases, other victims she'd helped through creative interpretations of her authority. Elena got the sense that Victoria saw them as proof that her approach worked, that sometimes justice required breaking the rules that were supposed to serve it. "The system is imperfect," Victoria had said during one visit. "It's designed by people, which means it has all the flaws people have. Sometimes the only way to make it work is to be willing to work around it. You two prove that." The museum opened on a Saturday in June. Over 300 people attended, far more than Elena had expected for a small town in Montana. Victims came, some of them, the ones who'd received anonymous restitution and somehow connected the dots back to this place. They walked through exhibits showing how Robert Chun had stolen from them, how his assets had been hidden, how justice had eventually been served. An 86-year-old woman approached Elena during the reception. "I lost my husband's life insurance money to Mountain West Resources," she said quietly. "We were going to retire in Florida, travel, enjoy our final years. Instead, I spent 3 decades in poverty. Then 6 months ago, I received a check for $567,000. Anonymous, just showed up in my mailbox with a note about restitution." She gripped Elena's hand. "I don't know how it happened. Don't know who found the money or how they distributed it. But I want you to know it changed my life. I'm living in Florida now, in a small condo by the beach. I got to fulfill the dream my husband and I had. I got my life back." Tears streamed down her face. "Thank you for preserving this history, for showing people that sometimes the bad guys don't win forever, that sometimes justice comes, even if it takes 30 years. Elena hugged her, this stranger who wasn't really a stranger, whose life had been touched by decisions Elena had made, choices she'd agonized over. "I'm glad you got your life back," Elena said honestly. "You deserved it." After the reception, after the crowds had dispersed and the museum had closed for the day, Elena and James stood in the vault. It was empty now except for replica documents and displays explaining what had been hidden here. The real assets were long gone, converted and distributed, turned from instruments of crime into tools of restitution. Do you ever regret it? James asked. What we did. How we did it. Elena thought about it honestly. I regret the laws we broke. I regret the risk we took, the danger we put ourselves in. But I don't regret the outcome. 63 people got justice they wouldn't have gotten any other way. That matters more than my comfort with the methods. My father would hate this, James said, gesturing around the vault at the museum above. Hate that his crimes are displayed, that his victims got restitution, that his name is associated with fraud and failure instead of success. That's the best revenge I could ask for. They climbed out of the vault together, up the ladder that Elena had first descended with shaking hands and no idea what she'd find. The pump house was quiet now. Lights off, museum exhibits waiting for tomorrow's visitors. Outside, the water tower loomed against the sunset, a monument to crimes committed and corrected, to secrets buried and uncovered. Elena's phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Chun, Mateo, asking when you'll be home. I told him soon. He drew you a picture of the museum. She smiled and texted back, on my way. 20 minutes. As she walked to her car, James called after her. Elena, wait. I've been thinking about something. About what we built here, the museum, the foundation, the restitution. We did something important, but it was also incredibly dangerous, incredibly lucky that it worked out. I know, Elena said. Believe me, I know. What if there are others? Other hidden caches, other stolen fortunes sitting in abandoned buildings or storage units or safety deposit boxes? What if there are people who know about them, who could recover them, but don't know how to do it right? How to ensure the money goes to victims instead of lawyers? Elena understood where he was going. You want to do this again. I want to help others do it. Provide guidance, legal support, connections to people like Victoria who understand that sometimes justice requires creativity. We have the resources now, the experience. We could establish something unofficial, underground, helping people recover stolen assets and distribute them to victims. It was insane. It was potentially criminal. It was everything Elena had promised herself she wouldn't risk again. But it was also appealing in a way she couldn't quite deny. They made a difference. They'd helped people who'd been forgotten by the system. They could do it again. Let me think about it, she said finally. Let me make sure Mateo's future is truly secure, that we're really in the clear. Then maybe we explore this idea. James nodded. No pressure. Just know that if you ever want to take on another impossible task, I'm here. Elena drove home through the Montana evening, the mountains dark against the fading light. She thought about the water tower she'd bought for $500, about the vault she'd discovered, about the choices she'd made that had led to this strange, complicated, beautiful outcome. She thought about Mateo waiting at home, safe and healthy and completely unaware of the crimes his mother had committed in pursuit of justice. She thought about her own mother, dead 15 years now, who'd broken laws to cross a border, who'd worked illegal jobs to feed her daughter, who'd risked everything for the chance at something better. Would she be proud of what Elena had done, or ashamed that her daughter had become a criminal? But Elena knew the answer. Her mother would understand, would recognize the same calculation Elena had made, weigh the rules against the people they claimed to serve, and choose people every time. Legality mattered, yes, but humanity mattered more. Mateo was waiting on Mrs. Chen's porch when Elena arrived, his drawing clutched in his small hands. It showed the water tower, the museum, and two stick figures he'd labeled Mom and Me. At the top, in careful letters, he'd written, My mom found treasure and helped people. Do you like it? Mateo asked, handing her the drawing. Elena looked at it, at her son's interpretation of events, simplified but fundamentally accurate. She had found treasure. She had helped people. The methods were complicated, the ethics questionable, the legality dubious. But the outcome was good. That had to count for something. I love it, baby, Elena said, picking him up despite the fact that he was getting too big for that. It's perfect. That night, after Mateo was asleep, Elena sat at her kitchen table. The same table where she'd agonized over auction listings, where she'd made lists of impossible choices, where she decided to take a chance on a condemned water tower. She opened her laptop and pulled up the financial statements for the accounts James had set up. $21 million. Even after she'd donated $2 million to various charities, invested $15 million in conservative fund for Mateo's future, bought a modest house in a good school district, and set up a proper savings account, she still had millions left. More money than she could spend, more security than she'd ever imagined. But it wasn't the money that made her feel successful. It was the letters they'd received, forwarded through anonymous channels, from victims thanking them for restitution. It was the elderly man who'd written that he could finally stop working, the woman who'd paid off her medical debt, the couple who'd bought back the house they'd lost 30 years ago. It was knowing that 63 lives had been changed because she climbed down a ladder into a vault and made hard choices about what justice meant. Elena opened a new document and started typing. Not a plan exactly, more like notes. Thoughts about what James had proposed, about helping others recover stolen assets, about building a network of people willing to work outside official channels to ensure victims receive justice. It was dangerous. It was probably illegal. It was everything rational people avoided. But Elena Martinez had stopped being rational the day she bid $500 on a condemned water tower. She'd chosen hope over fear, possibility over safety. She'd chosen to believe that sometimes ordinary people could do extraordinary things if they were brave enough to try. 1 year after discovering the vault, Elena stood on a stage at the University of Montana giving a guest lecture in a criminology class. The invitation had surprised her. She had no formal education in law or ethics, just experience doing things that were probably crimes in pursuit of what she believed was justice. But the professor who'd invited her was Victoria Rodriguez, who'd left the FBI 6 months earlier to teach, and who decided her students needed to understand that justice wasn't always found in law books. The system is designed to serve justice, Elena told the class of 70 students, most of them younger than she was. But design and function aren't always the same thing. Sometimes the system fails. Sometimes the rules that are meant to protect people end up protecting the powerful instead. And when that happens, you have to decide who you are. Someone who follows rules even when they create injustice, or someone who breaks rules to serve a higher purpose. A student raised her hand. But that's vigilante justice. That's dangerous. Who decides what's right if we all just ignore laws we don't like? Excellent question, Elena said. I'm not advocating chaos. I'm not saying ignore all laws. I'm saying that sometimes, in specific circumstances, with careful thought and ethical consideration, breaking certain rules serves justice better than following them. It's not about what you like or don't like. It's about what serves the most good for the most people. She told them the story, edited for legal safety, but fundamentally honest. A condemned water tower, a hidden vault, stolen assets, and defrauded victims. A choice between legal channels that would have failed those victims and illegal methods that made them whole. She didn't say it was her story, presented it as hypothetical, but everyone in the room knew. So what would you have done? She asked the class. Follow the law and watch victims get pennies while lawyers got rich? Or break the law and ensure justice was served? The discussion that followed was heated, passionate, with students arguing both sides. Some said law was law, had to be followed, or society collapsed. Others argued that unjust laws deserved to be broken, that moral duty superseded legal obligation. Victoria let them debate for 20 minutes before calling time. The truth, Victoria said, is that there's no easy answer. Law and justice don't always align. When they diverge, you have to choose what you serve. And that choice defines who you are. After the class, Elena and Victoria had coffee in the student union. You were excellent up there, Victoria said. Have you considered teaching? Elena laughed. I barely finished high school. I don't think I'm qualified. Experience qualifies you better than degrees. You've lived through moral complexity. You made impossible choices. That's worth more than academic theory. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Victoria said quietly, I heard from James. He said you're considering his proposal. The network for recovering stolen assets. I'm thinking about it, Elena admitted. It feels like tempting fate. We got lucky once. Trying again seems reckless. Or it seems like using your success to help others. Victoria paused. If you do this, if you build this network, I want to be involved. Not officially, obviously, but as an advisor, a resource. Someone who understands both the legal system and its limitations. Elena looked at her friend, because that's what Victoria had become. A friend forged in shared secrets and common purpose. You'd risk your career again? I left the FBI because I was tired of watching the system fail people. Teaching helps, but it's not enough. If you're building something that actually serves victims, that actually delivers justice, I want to help. Over the next 6 months, they built it carefully, quietly. A network of lawyers willing to work in gray areas, financial experts who understood how to trace and recover. Hidden assets, former law enforcement with connections and expertise. They established encrypted communication channels, created protocols for verifying claims and distributing recovered funds. They built something that didn't exist in any legal framework, but served a purpose the legal system couldn't. They called it the Restitution Project. Unofficial, underground, operating entirely through word of mouth and encrypted recommendations. If you'd been defrauded, if you knew where stolen assets were hidden, if you needed help recovering what was yours, the Restitution Project could assist. Not legally, not officially, but effectively. The first case came from a woman in Oregon whose father had embezzled from his business partners before dying in a car accident. She knew he'd hidden money somewhere, knew his victims deserved restitution, but had no idea how to find the assets or distribute them legally. The Restitution Project helped her search, recover nearly $8 million, and distribute it to the people her father had defrauded. The whole process took 3 months and never involved official legal channels. The second case was more complex, a Ponzi scheme operator who'd hidden assets offshore before his arrest. His victims had received nothing through the official bankruptcy proceedings. The Restitution Project tracked the money through shell corporations and foreign banks, recovered $18 million, and distributed it anonymously to verified victims. Justice served, laws broken, victims made whole. Elena didn't participate directly in every case. She had Mateo to raise, a life to build. But she advised, she consulted, she helped others navigate the ethical complexities of choosing justice over legality. And, when needed, she contributed resources from her own fortune, funding investigations and distributions when cases required more capital than they could generate. By the second anniversary of discovering the vault, the Restitution Project had handled 11 cases, recovered over $200 million in stolen assets, and provided restitution to nearly 400 victims. None of it was legal. All of it was necessary. Elena had become exactly what her younger self would never have imagined. A criminal with a conscience, a lawbreaker in service of justice. Proof that sometimes the right thing and the legal thing diverged completely. Mateo was 8 now, thriving in school, healthy and happy. He knew his mother had found something valuable, knew they were better off than they'd been. But he didn't know about the crimes, the risks, the choices Elena had made. That would come later, when he was old enough to understand complexity, to grapple with ethical nuance. For now, he just knew his mom was someone who helped people, and that was enough. Elena stood at the water tower on a cold November evening, 2 years almost to the day from when she'd first seen this place. The museum was closed for the season, but she had keys. She let herself in, walked through the exhibits documenting Robert Chen's crimes and the restitution that had followed. She descended into the vault, now just an empty room with plaques explaining what had been hidden here. She thought about the journey. From broke, single mother gambling $500 on a condemned water tower to wealthy woman running an underground network delivering justice outside legal channels. She thought about every choice, every risk, every law broken in service of making things right. Was she a criminal? Yes, technically. She'd stolen from a bankruptcy estate, laundered money, engaged in wire fraud and conspiracy. She'd broken laws deliberately, repeatedly, without remorse. But she'd also helped people, delivered justice, made victims whole when the system had failed them. She turned a dead man's crimes into restitution for those he'd hurt. Did that justify what she'd done? Elena didn't know. Probably not in any legal sense. But in a moral sense, in the calculation of harm versus good, she believed it did. She'd made the world slightly better by being willing to break rules that served no purpose except protecting the powerful. Her phone buzzed. A message from James. New case. Factory owner embezzled pension fund. Died before prosecution. Widow knows where he hid assets, but won't report officially because she'll lose everything. 83 workers lost their retirements. Can we help? Elena read the message twice. Another impossible situation. Another choice between law and justice. Another chance to do what the system couldn't or wouldn't. She thought about those 83 workers, about people who'd spent careers building something only to have it stolen, about retirement years that should have been comfortable turned desperate. She typed back, "Send me the details. Let's see what we can do." Because that's who she was now. Elena Martinez, former nursing home aide, current vigilante for financial justice. Woman who'd bought a condemned water tower and found not just money but purpose. Mother teaching her son that sometimes you had to color outside the lines to create something beautiful. She climbed out of the vault for what might be the last time, turned off the museum lights, and locked the door behind her. The water tower stood silent against the starlit sky, still damaged, still listing, still a monument to secrets buried and truths uncovered. It would stand there for years probably, a rusted reminder that ordinary places could hold extraordinary secrets, that ordinary people could do extraordinary things. Elena drove home through the Montana darkness, past forests and mountains and small towns struggling to survive. She thought about her mother who'd crossed borders for opportunity, about Mateo, who'd never know poverty like she'd known it, about the life she'd built from $500 in courage and willingness to take chances. Somewhere in Oregon, 83 workers were waiting for justice they'd probably never receive through official channels. But they'd receive it anyway, because Elena and her network existed, because some people refused to accept that theft should go unpunished just because the thief died before facing consequences. The road stretched ahead, dark and empty. Elena turned on the radio, let music fill the car, and allowed herself to feel it. Not happiness exactly, but something deeper. Satisfaction. Purpose. The bone-deep certainty that her life mattered, that her choices had made a difference, that buying a condemned water tower for $500 had led to something far more valuable than money. She found treasure, yes. $356 million hidden in a vault under a pump house. But the real treasure was what she'd built with it. Justice for victims, restitution for the defrauded, proof that sometimes courage and creativity mattered more than credentials or authority. Mateo was still awake when she got home, reading in bed, his inhaler on a nightstand where it belonged. He looked up and smiled. "Did you have a good day, Mom?" "Yeah, baby," Elena said, kissing his forehead. "I had a very good day." She meant it, because somewhere, people were sleeping better knowing that justice might come even if the system failed them. Somewhere, victims were being made whole by an underground network that shouldn't exist, but did. Somewhere, a condemned water tower stood as proof that ordinary people willing to break rules in service of something greater could change the world. Elena Martinez had bought a water tower for $500 and found $356 million in hidden assets. But more than that, she'd found herself, who she was, who she could be, what she was capable of when she chose courage over fear. And that, she thought, turning out the lights and heading to bed, was worth more than all the money in all the vaults in the world. 5 years after discovering the vault, Elena stood in a conference room in Seattle, facing 12 people who'd traveled from across the country for this meeting. They were all like her, ordinary people who'd stumbled into extraordinary situations, who'd found hidden assets, and faced impossible choices about what to do with them. The restitution project had grown beyond anything she'd imagined. What had started as her and James and Victoria had become a network of 47 active members, with another 100-plus affiliated professionals who provided specialized services. They'd handled 63 cases in 5 years, recovered over $2 billion in stolen assets, and provided restitution to more than 3,000 victims. And they'd never been caught. The key, Elena was explaining to the newcomers, is understanding that we're not thieves. We're not stealing. We're recovering what was already stolen and returning it to rightful owners. That moral clarity has to guide everything you do, because the moment you cross that line, the moment you take something for yourself beyond reasonable compensation, you become what we're fighting against. A woman in her 40s raised her hand. But how do you decide what's reasonable compensation? I found $8 million hidden in my uncle's storage unit. Money he embezzled from his employer before he died. If I return it through your network, what am I entitled to keep? Nothing, Elena said firmly. You're entitled to nothing. The money isn't yours. It's your uncle's victim's money. What we offer is this: help you return it safely, anonymously, in a way that ensures victims receive justice without you facing criminal prosecution. Your compensation is knowing you did the right thing. That's not very motivating, a young man in the back said. James, sitting beside Elena, leaned forward. Then this isn't for you. We're not here to help people profit from crimes their relatives committed. We're here to help people who want to do right but don't know how. If you're looking for a way to keep stolen money, you're in the wrong room. The young man stood and left. Elena watched him go without regret. Better to lose people now than to recruit someone who'd compromise the network's integrity later. The meeting continued for 3 hours. Elena and James shared their story in detail now, 5 years removed from immediate danger. They explained how they'd worked with Victoria, how they'd verified victims and distributed assets, how they'd navigated legal risks while serving moral imperatives. They shared protocols and procedures, introduced the network of lawyers and financial experts who supported the work, explained encryption and security measures. By the end, 8 of the original 12 remained. 8 people committed to returning found assets to victims rather than keeping them. 8 new members of a network that operated in the shadows, serving justice when the light of law failed to reach. After the meeting, Victoria pulled Elena aside. I heard from a contact at the FBI. They know something's happening. Not specifically about us, but they've noticed patterns. Anonymous restitution payments, recovered assets appearing in victims' accounts, cases that should be open suddenly resolving themselves. They're starting to ask questions. Elena felt the old fear return, the tightening in her chest that she'd learned to manage but never fully conquered. How much time do we have? Hard to say. Could be months, could be years. But we need to be careful. Maybe slow down operations, be more selective about cases we take on. That night, in her hotel room, Elena video called Matteo. He was 13 now, tall for his age, with his father's dark eyes and Elena's stubborn determination. He was at home with the nanny Elena had hired, a woman Mrs. Chun had recommended before she'd passed away the previous year. How's the trip, Mom? Matteo asked. He was sitting at the kitchen table of their house, the nice house in the good neighborhood that Elena had bought with money that had once belonged to a criminal. Good, Mijo. Productive. I'll be home tomorrow night. Are you helping more people? Matteo asked. He knew now, had known for 2 years, what his mother did. Elena had decided on his 11th birthday that he was old enough to understand complexity, to grapple with the truth that his comfortable life was built on his mother's choice to break laws in service of justice. He'd taken it better than she'd feared. Had asked good questions, hard questions. Had wanted to understand not just what she did, but why. And when she'd explained about victims who deserved justice, about systems that failed and people who had to step up, he nodded slowly and said, like Robin Hood, but with banks instead of bows. It wasn't a perfect analogy, but it was close enough. Yeah, baby. Trying to help people who got hurt by people who should have known better. Be safe, okay? I worry about you. Elena's heart clenched. 13 years old and already worrying about his mother's illegal activities. What kind of childhood was she giving him? I'm always safe. I promise. After they hung up, Elena sat in the dark hotel room and questioned everything for the 1,000th time. Was this right? Was she helping or just perpetuating cycles of lawbreaking? Was she teaching Mateo important lessons about justice or corrupting him with moral relativism? She'd done good work. She knew that. Thousands of people had received restitution they'd never have gotten through legal channels. Lives had been changed, wrongs corrected, justice served. But she'd also built a criminal enterprise, recruited others into breaking laws, created a network that existed specifically to subvert legal systems. What would her mother think? What would she say if she knew her daughter had become someone who taught others how to commit crimes in service of greater good? Elena pulled out her phone and opened the folder where she kept letters from victims. Hundreds of them, received through anonymous channels, thanking the unknown benefactors who'd returned stolen money. She read through them, reminding herself why this mattered. An 89-year-old man who'd gotten his pension back after 20 years. I thought I'd die poor. Now I can afford my medications and actually eat 3 meals a day. God bless whoever did this. A woman whose father had embezzled from his business partners. Returning this money won't bring back the years my family spent in shame, but it's the right thing. Thank you for making it possible. A couple who'd lost everything to a Ponzi scheme. We never thought we'd see justice. The courts failed us. The system failed us. But someone remembered. Someone cared. We can retire now with dignity. Thank you. These are the reasons. These lives changed, these wrongs corrected. This was why Elena broke laws and recruited others and built networks in shadows. Because the alternative was watching victims suffer while legal systems ground slowly toward nothing. The next morning, Elena received a call that would change everything again. James, his voice tight with controlled panic. We have a problem. A major problem. Turn on the news. Elena found a television, switched to CNN, and felt her stomach drop. The headline scrolling across the bottom of the screen, FBI investigating underground restitution network. Anonymous group allegedly returning stolen assets outside legal channels. The report was vague, clearly based on limited information. But it was enough. Someone had talked. Someone had leaked. The network's existence was now public knowledge, and federal authorities were actively investigating. Elena's phone exploded with calls. Network members panicking, lawyers advising immediate shutdown, Victoria calling with warnings from her former colleagues. The careful structure they'd built over 5 years was collapsing in real time. She called an emergency meeting of the core leadership, James, Victoria, and 3 other founding members. They met in a secure location, phones off, sweeping for surveillance devices before beginning. We need to shut down, one member said immediately. Destroy all records, dissolve the network, disappear before they can trace anything back to us. We can't just abandon ongoing cases, another argued. We have victims waiting for restitution, people counting on us. Victoria held up her hand. I made some calls. The investigation is real, but they don't have much. No names yet, no specific cases. They know something exists, but not how it works or who runs it. We have time, but not much. Time for what? Elena asked. Time to decide what we want this network to be going forward. Do we shut down and protect ourselves? Or do we come forward, go public, force a conversation about why we had to exist in the first place? The room fell silent. Going public meant almost certain prosecution. It meant exposing everyone in the network, putting dozens of people at risk of federal charges. It meant Elena potentially going to prison, Mateo losing his mother, everything she'd built collapsing. But it also meant telling their story, showing the world what they'd accomplished, why it had been necessary, forcing a public debate about justice and legality and the gap between them. It meant the possibility of change, of reform, of creating space within legal systems for the kind of work they've been doing in shadows. I need to think, Elena said. We all need to think. Let's reconvene in 48 hours with proposals for how to proceed. She drove back to Montana, back to Copper Falls, back to the water tower. The museum was open, tourists wandering through exhibits about Robert Chen's crimes and the restitution that had followed. Elena stood in front of the display about the vault, reading the sanitized version of events that presented her discovery as simple cooperation with authorities. A young woman stood beside her, reading the same plaque. It's amazing, isn't it? The woman said. that someone found all this money and actually gave it back instead of keeping it. You don't see that often. No, Elena agreed. You don't. Makes me think there are still good people in the world. People who do the right thing, even when it's hard. After the woman moved on, Elena descended into the vault. It was cleaner now, well lit, no longer the dark mystery she'd first explored. But standing there, she could still feel the weight of that first discovery, the impossible choices it had presented, the path it had set her on. Her phone buzzed. A text from Mateo. Mom, I saw the news about the restitution network. That's you, isn't it? Elena's hands were shaking as she typed back. We need to talk when I get home. I know it's you. I know what you've been doing. And I think it's brave. I think it's right. Whatever happens, I'm proud of you. She sat down hard on the concrete floor, tears streaming down her face. 13 years old, and he understood. Understood that his mother was a criminal, yes, but also someone who'd chosen to serve justice when no one else would. Understood that right and legal weren't always the same thing, that sometimes courage meant breaking rules to serve principles larger than law. When Elena got home that evening, Mateo was waiting. He'd made dinner, spaghetti with the sauce recipe Mrs. Chan had taught him before she died. They ate together in their nice kitchen in their nice house bought with money from Crimes Corrected, and Elena told him everything. Not the sanitized version, not the story shaped for museums and public consumption, but the truth. She told him about the fear, about the times she'd almost been caught, about Victoria's cooperation and James's partnership, and the 63 cases that had delivered justice to thousands. She told him about the choice she was facing now: run and protect herself, or come forward and fight for change. What do you want to do? Mateo asked when she finished. I want to keep you safe, Elena said. Everything I've done to build a better life for you. If I come forward, if I expose the network, I could go to prison. You could end up in foster care. Everything we've built could collapse. Mateo considered this seriously, his face showing maturity beyond his years. But if you run, if you hide, you're saying that what you did was wrong, that helping those people was wrong. Is that what you believe? No, I believe we did what was necessary when the system failed. Then don't hide. Tell people that. Make them understand why you had to do it this way. Baby, it's not that simple. The law, I know the law says what you did was wrong, but you taught me that laws are made by people, and people make mistakes. You taught me that sometimes you have to stand up for what's right even when it's scary. Were you lying when you taught me that? Elena looked at her son, at this person she'd raised through poverty and struggle, who'd somehow emerged wise and brave and principled. No, I wasn't lying. Then don't lie now. Don't hide who you are or what you did. Show people that sometimes breaking rules serves justice better than following them. Show them why you had to do it this way. At the emergency meeting 48 hours later, Elena presented her proposal. We go public, not to surrender, but to fight. We release everything, all 63 cases, all documentation showing how we verified victims and distributed assets, all evidence that we served justice when legal systems failed. We make it impossible for them to prosecute us without having to defend why those victims didn't receive help through official channels. They'll still prosecute, Victoria said. Federal prosecutors don't like being embarrassed. This will make them look bad, which means they'll come after us harder. Maybe, but we'll have public opinion. We'll have victims testifying that we helped them when no one else would. We'll force a national conversation about financial justice and restitution and whether the current system actually serves victims. Elena looked around the room. We built this network to help people. Now we use it to change the system that made it necessary. James smiled. That's ambitious. Possibly insane. Probably illegal in new and creative ways. So is everything else we've done, Elena countered. They voted. Of the 7 core members, 6 voted to go public. Only 1 dissented, choosing to leave the network rather than face exposure. Elena accepted his resignation without argument. This had to be voluntary. Everyone involved had to choose this path, knowing the risks. Over the next week, they prepared. They compiled documentation of every case, victim identities, asset amounts, distribution records. They recorded video testimonials from victims willing to speak publicly about receiving anonymous restitution. They drafted a statement explaining their mission, their methods, and their moral reasoning. And then, on a Tuesday morning in March, they released everything, sent it to major news outlets, posted it on encrypted platforms, made it impossible to suppress or ignore. The Restitution Project was no longer a rumor or investigation. It was a public reality, documented and defended, challenging the world to decide whether justice or legality mattered more. The response was immediate and explosive. News channels ran stories around the clock. Legal experts debated whether the network's actions constituted crimes or creative civil disobedience. Victim advocacy groups praised the work while law enforcement agencies condemned it. Social media divided sharply between those who saw Elena and her network as heroes and those who saw them as dangerous vigilantes. 3 days after going public, Elena received a call from the FBI. Special Agent Michael Torres, head of the investigation, wanted to meet. Not to arrest her, he emphasized, just to talk. They met at a coffee shop in Missoula, public and neutral. Torres was younger than Elena expected, maybe 40, with tired eyes that suggested he'd seen too much of humanity's worst and wasn't sure what to make of its complicated best. "You've put me in an impossible position," he said without preamble. "I have clear evidence of multiple federal crimes. Wire fraud, money laundering, theft from bankruptcy estates, conspiracy. I could arrest you right now, and the charges would stick." "But you haven't," Elena observed, "because I've also interviewed 53 victims your network helped. People who lost everything to fraud and got nothing through legal channels until you stepped in. People who are crying with gratitude for what you did. How do I prosecute someone for that? How do I stand in front of a jury and argue that you should go to prison for returning stolen money to victims?" "You do your job," Elena said. "You enforce the law as written. That's what you're supposed to do." "And what about you? What are you supposed to do?" "Serve justice when the law fails to do it." Torres leaned back, studying her. "You know what happens if we prosecute, right? High-profile trial, national media attention, victims testifying on your behalf. We might win legally, but we'll lose in the court of public opinion. The FBI will look like we're punishing someone for helping fraud victims." "So don't prosecute," Elena said. "Let this be the catalyst for reform. Work with Congress to create legal pathways for victim restitution, streamline bankruptcy procedures, make it possible to do what we did without breaking laws." "You think it's that simple? That we can just change the entire legal system because you proved it's flawed?" "No, but I think we can start. I think this moment, this attention, this public conversation we've forced, it's an opportunity. The question is whether you'll take it or whether you'll defend a system that everyone now knows failed thousands of victims." Torres was silent for a long moment. Then, "I need to make some calls. Talk to people above my pay grade. But Elena, understand something. Even if we don't prosecute, your life is never going to be normal again. You've made yourself too visible, too important. You're going to be scrutinized, investigated, watched for the rest of your life." "I know. But at least I'll be watched while actually trying to change things instead of hiding and wondering what could have been." Over the next 6 months, something remarkable happened. The attention Elena's network had generated forced real conversations about financial justice reform. Congressional hearings were held. Victim advocacy groups gained new prominence. Bankruptcy laws were re-examined. Several states passed legislation creating faster restitution pathways for fraud victims. The FBI never filed charges. Instead, quietly, they offered Elena and her network immunity in exchange for cooperation. They wanted to understand the methods, the procedures, the verification processes the network had developed. They wanted to adapt those approaches for legitimate use within the justice system. It wasn't the revolution Elena had hoped for, but it was change. Real, measurable change that would help victims beyond those her network had already served. The Restitution Project officially disbanded, its work now public record, its methods being studied and adapted by legitimate authorities. But unofficially, quietly, Elena and her core team continued advising. helping law enforcement understand how to trace hidden assets, how to verify victim claims, how to distribute restitution efficiently. Working within the system now, using their experience to make it function better. 10 years after buying a